again, welcome everybody to this morning's session. I'm Fritz, and I'm one of the partners at Firefly and work with the personal lines team. TJ is one of those members, and you'll get to hear a lot from him here in just a few minutes. But we also really feel that there's some relevant information here about how you actually use EZLynx, how you think about it, a few tips and tricks as you're actually in there using it that come from TJ's experience both in sales and working with a lot of you agents from a training or quote review perspective. TJ, let's turn it over to you.
Hey everybody. So kind of like the overarching goal of today's webinar is basically just to achieve an understanding about EZLynx, like what it is, how it can be used effectively when quoting. Achieving this understanding will help reduce frustration, like when not getting the expected results, while also increasing your productivity. So like, what is EZLynx? EZLynx is basically a tool. It's to increase your efficiency. And basically it's just a vehicle for information mostly. EZLynx does not create your proposal. It shows you roughly where your carriers stand on specific risks. And these quotes that you do in EZLynx will require a fine tuning on the carrier side. Some things that I hear from agents is just listed years. My rates went up after I bridged. My rates are not competitive. What is the point of EZLynx if I need to fix the quote on the carrier side? If there are no reports, how can I sell the policy? And some people even think EZLynx is a waste of time. Now, and I'll be honest with you, all of those things are true unless you approach EZLynx with the right mindset, and like on what it is and what it's doing for you and how you can make it work for you.
And so on that, TJ, could I just ask real quick, just as a point of clarification here, it sounds like what you're saying is maybe some of the frustrations agents have is they're expecting to like do something in EZLynx and send to their customer a proposal from EZLynx, and you're saying nope, that's not what EZLynx is
that's
for.
not what it is. Yeah, it's not a precision tool. It's definitely going to be more of a tool that you can gather information into one system and it will filter it out. It's almost like a backwards funnel into all of your carriers. So instead of doing 20 quotes or 15 quotes or whatever state you're in, you're doing one quote. That information is going to get over there, and then you're going to kind of dot the I's and cross the T's on the back end.
Yeah, and I think that is a good starting concept. TJ and I were talking before the session that what metaphors could we use for EZLynx, and maybe for agents for you to think of it as either a filter, that tells you which carriers do or don't want a piece of business, or maybe like a compass that's pointing in the direction to say, hey, these are the 2 or 3 that you might most want to check out. One thing that I think is really important, having been with Firefly since 2005 and seeing carriers go through ups and downs of rate, is for you as agents to recognize too that EZLynx is a great tool for you in sending you market signals on what the carriers are actually doing and thinking and who's competitive. We've absolutely seen, a carrier who's like they're really competitive, and then they take rate because of the underwriting cycle, and then they're more competitive again. If you just pick a couple carriers and quote directly there, you will miss those signals and you'll miss out on diversifying your book over a number of carriers, which, by the way, in a hard market especially, is a great way to reduce some of the work, where if you have too many of your customers with one carrier and then that carrier takes some rate, boy, you've just created a whole lot of work for yourself too.
What does that mean, that it's not a precision tool and things like that? So there's some important things to understand about EZLynx that will reduce your stress and frustration. And 3 of the big pieces to understand is that coverage A on the home is an estimate, protection class is an estimate, and there's no reporting in EZLynx. So if you understand those 3 things going in, it's less frustrating at the end when you realize those rates aren't exactly what you're going to get on the carrier side. So the biggest tip that I can give you guys, and we'll talk about a little bit more, is estimate a little high on some of those things. Let the rate come back to you. I have some people that'll put in an arbitrary effective date or arbitrary RCE or something like that, but they go kind of low on it. Like maybe they match a client's previous policy, but maybe that policy was written before the hard market. We all have felt it. RCEs are coming in really high right now. Maybe a $150,000 house 4 years ago is a $350,000 RCE on a house now. So if you're going, again, we'll talk about this a little bit more. If you're going in low and it's jumping up, you're constantly trying to like reel in that rate, when there's ways to kind of let it come back to you to a more reasonable understanding on what to expect going to the carrier side.
maybe letting your surprises be positive instead of negative, I guess, in part, right? And I think you got some examples of that for us.
Yeah, yeah. So I created this chart here. Um, this is not a real house. I just said a 2,000 square foot house, and this is just an example. You could even estimate a little higher because the character stance on the risk is going to be relative. So generally, your competitiveness is not going to change. So if you're $50,000 higher on a home or $100,000 higher, typically those carriers are going to fall in the same spots. So let's say you estimated the RCE on this home, this 2,000 square foot home, at the previous policy of $150,000, and you estimated the protection class at 2. So you don't know what it is, which is a pretty good protection class as far as like risk is concerned. In the green zone, what I would typically suggest is estimate your RCE at like 150 or $175 per square foot. That gets you to $300,000. And then estimate your protection class a little high. Like maybe it is a 1 or a 2 or even a 3, but just hover around a 4 or 5 in EZLynx, unless it's an obvious 8. Then you don't want to sell yourself short on that one either. But typically, the risks that we're placing with preferred carriers are not going to be in those more rural areas. Now, let's say you get to the carrier, and that's this blue zone, and you do your RCE, you fine tune the quote, and it comes in at 300,000 with a real protection class of 3. In this scenario, the first agent has to combat a $150,000 increase on their RCE and a 1 point increase on their protection class. Whereas the second agent who did estimate a little high in EZLynx that has no increase to combat on their RCE, and their protection class actually got a little bit better. So the kind of the takeaway is on this is if you estimate a little high in EZLynx, because again, it is not a precision tool, instead of seeing those big jumps, you're going to have that rate come back to you when you go to your carrier site.
Yeah, which would reduce some of that feeling of frustration. You know, frustration being defined the way you feel when what you experience is different than what you expected. You know, if you go in knowing I'm trying to give myself some wiggle room on this, I think that can feel better. Now, TJ, there was a question here from Jason Armagita that actually relates to this, so I figured I'd ask. He asks, does anyone know of an online resource to look up protection class aside from calling the fire marshal? Looks like Max Sternberg is saying he notes that some carriers won't quote if you put in PC10, even if it doesn't end up in that protection class. So that's an interesting point, Max, if that's correct. So maybe you don't put in a 10 just in case it's not. But what would you say, TJ, about figuring out protection classes? My
It
thought, by
looks
the way,
like
would have been to go to the just pick a carrier and they will run it when you actually quote it there. But
looks like Matt Frazier actually mentioned Kemper Property Info.
well, and I see there's a few comments here about Donegal has a link on their landing page where you can get that, and a link to wsrb.com and a few things. So maybe we'll check some of those links out afterward. And if we say, hey, that's looking good, that's something we could email out to everybody along with the video. So appreciate the question and the comments. And I guess I would say, you know, in the short run, what you can do is if you do what TJ suggested and just estimate maybe a little high on what the protection class is, then go to the carrier that's looking like it's going to be the best. They will tell you what their protection class would be, and at least at that point, you're working with solid information.
As I said earlier, EZLynx is just the beginning. So at this point, like when you're in EZLynx and you've got that quote, there is another phase. There's the fine tuning phase. So that EZLynx quote is important to remember. I have had people try to print off those quotes and propose them to their client. I would not do that. Now, what does fine tuning on the carrier site mean? So there's a lot of things you can do, but the main key points that I look at it as is check for any unanswered questions and underwrite it in the underwriting sections, complete the RCE on the home, verify your discounts, and run the clue. And if you're ready to bind the MVR, because as we know, sometimes they're not free, so you want to be diligent or a little bit more vigilant on that. So so the goal here is to develop a workflow that gets your info into EZLynx and you off to the most competitive carrier. If you can shrink your EZLynx time and grow your fine tuning time, your money's going to go up.
Yeah, well, and related to that, I think this is one of the things as TJ and I were preparing this, and he was sharing with me his insights from both his work on this generally and, you know, that is selling and working with agents, is that the idea of EZLynx is it's a time saver if you can use it to save all that data entry time, because of course the data is now in all the carriers if you want to go to it, and get that direction on which carrier to go to, and pretty quickly hop into the carrier that looks like it's going to be the best fit, so that you can do this step. And that if you do that, in fact, I think TJ, you said that you will observe sometimes agents who are they're trying to do the fine tuning in EZLynx and make sure every little detail is correct in EZLynx, even though it might not translate quite right to the carrier websites. And it sounds like your advice is to say, no, put in enough to get the rate indication, then go to the carrier and take those steps that were on the page that you just showed. Is that
Hmm.
roughly right? And then
Yep.
related to that, what if, let's say they get to the part of running reports and it pulls up, this never happened to you, agents. I'm probably the only one who the person says, no, I have no accidents and tickets. And it turns out they have 5 tickets or something. So what do they do? What's your advice, TJ? They run the reports and it shows up some stuff that they had not put into EZLynx before.
Yeah, if you get a surprise, obviously those surprises can be a minor premium change up to including eligibility. If it's eligibility, obviously you'll need to pivot to a non-standard. However, if it's just like a minor increase, you might consider circling back into EZLynx on their accidents and violations page, enter in the data from that, the accurate data from that report, and then see where the carriers stand after that. Um, I don't ever do it on the first quote only because it might not, they might be acting like the client may not know that that fell off, or maybe they don't know the conviction date. And then all of a sudden let's say the clue pulls the same thing, but the conviction dates are different. So it duplicates, but you're not aware of that. You could have duplicate surcharges, which would kind of
Hmm.
hurt the end goal of getting the best solution for the client.
Yeah. So in any case, though, for agents, if you haven't been doing that, though, if you do run reports and you get some activity, especially if it does have an impact, it could be a great step to then go back to EZLynx, update that data, and just see, is it possible that a carrier, based on how far their look back is or whatever, it might shift the order of who actually is the best fit for that particular prospect. Okay.
So now here's some pointers on how to kind of save time in EZLynx. Sometimes when I go into quote reviews and I go in and we push out the quotes, and it's just like set login, set login, set login, set login. If you don't have your full tools like at your disposal, it can be very frustrating. And if you let them kind of get out of control, you're going to be spending more time updating those logins at the point of your quotes instead of if you maintain them. So I would definitely, as soon as you do an update on a carrier site, update your logins in EZLynx. Understand what exactly you can quote in EZLynx. I know that it shows dwelling fire. None of our carriers support dwelling fire, so it is auto, home, condo, and renters. So know like what you can take into there, and then residual policies sell at the carrier side. Um,
And can I actually go back to the previous one? I'm sorry, just with a real quick item that I just thought of, TJ. One reason
mhm.
why it's important to update those passwords in EZLynx, and I'd say even if you're feeling like, that carrier hasn't been competitive, it doesn't really matter, is that uh, EZLynx gives you some rate signals on what carriers are doing. You also send messages to carriers by your use or non-use of EZLynx. And here's what I mean by that. We get reports from carriers on the back end of Firefly saying, hey, we have these agents who are appointed with us and they never quote us. Should we just terminate the appointment? And it's a fair question, right? Because there are costs that they incur to have every agent on board. And so I guess what I'm getting at is what TJ is getting at there is if you update your password for a carrier and you don't update it in EZLynx, maybe it doesn't cost any business at first, but from that carrier's perspective, they see no activity and they will terminate agents for no activity. There's not a production requirement, per carrier, but there is a quoting requirement. And they really do come to us with that kind of stuff. And I want to tell you how easy it is for us to say, and I've been in some of these conversations, hey, if these agents are quoting you a ton of times and you're not getting the business, it must be that you're not as competitive as you need to be there. And they'll accept that every time. But when they say this person hasn't quoted us in, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months or whatever, then how can we say, no, no, keep that agent, because the message that's being sent through the non-quoting is that that's not an important carrier to you. And I guess again, we've been doing this long enough to see the carrier that doesn't seem important to you right now. Boy, you give them a year or two, and suddenly you might say, "What do I have to do to get that carrier?" So it's just best to keep them happy. and make sure you're always quoting everybody every time, even if you know or think they're not going to be competitive.
Um, the next one is like pick an effective date and don't deviate. Do this with the advanced discount in mind. So this avoids confusion, avoids price changes, avoids the need to make policy changes post bind, and it helps your rate be more competitive. Now, the things that I've seen when this happens is, so, like, somebody will just throw an arbitrary effective date on there. They'll go out, they'll fine tune their quote, they'll run their reports, and then they're like, "Oh, wait, but closing was this day," and then they'll move it, and then all of a sudden, everything just gets mucked up. It just really messes everything up. It will increase their rate. Another thing is they'll lose discounts, and I've seen that happen even post bind. Like, say something changed after they bound it, they quoted with the advanced quote discount, and then they circle back and then they made the change, and then all of a sudden there was an increase in rate. All of a sudden this person has canceled their policy, they have this new policy, and now it's going up to a rate that they didn't agree to. So I would definitely say work with that real information up front, and then figure out where you're going to be, figure out what kind of wiggle room you have for your advanced quote discount, select your effective date, and again, don't deviate from that.
And so maybe with that, TJ, would an example be if you have somebody who is closing on a home and you know it's going to be on such and such a date, might as well use that, right? So because that's out of your control. Whereas if you have somebody who's just saying, "Hey, I just thought I'd check my rate," that if it's okay to put an effective date that's a couple weeks out or however long it needs to be for the advanced quote discount, to do that, and then not say to the person, "Oh, you're willing to do it now, let's make it effective tomorrow." Just use the date that you had, letting them know that that was the date you'd quoted so that they can get that best rate.
Hmm.
That's kind of that's where applying that realism might work. Okay,
Yep.
cool.
And then lastly, always collect pertinent information so you don't have to chase it down later. Social security number. I know sometimes it's a sticking point, but it's going to be good for rate accuracy. Your the license number, again, rate accuracy. VIN, again, rate accuracy. Also, in EZLynx, just a little side note on VIN. If you just use your make and model, it gives you a fake, it generates a fake VIN number. The problem with the carrier sites is oftentimes they only count the characters. So if it has the right amount of characters and it doesn't throw up an error, sometimes you can accidentally bind that policy with a fake PIN number.
Uh,
And lastly is email. And this has happened to me so many times. The agent's ready, like, TJ, come on, let's bind this up. Awesome, let's go in. They didn't collect email and EZLynx. They got paperless policy and all the stuff that they need, and they're like, oh, I need the email. And they're like, wait a minute, I've talked to this client through text for a long time. And then so next thing they're like, so we have to hop off the quote review. They have to contact the client. The client doesn't pick up. They can't email the client because they don't have the email. They try to text the client. And all of a sudden we're like, oh, hey, TJ, let's just schedule it for tomorrow, whatever it is. And what could have been a copy and paste from EZLynx turned into a big event trying to chase down this email. Again, not all this stuff is going to apply to everybody. These are just things that we see, and it's the whole measure twice, cut once philosophy. Just make sure you have everything in place. That way, it doesn't cost you time later, because time is money in this industry.
yeah, it really is. If you can avoid the spinning of wheels, that's a good thing. And I think I could add too that email in EZLynx will have a lot of other wonderful uses too. If you want to set up some, email automations to send messages out to new customers, or if you're using Retention Center, there's a lot of stuff you can do from email within EZLynx. So grabbing that piece of information has a lot of positive uses. One of them, like TJ is saying, is making sure you can just actually issue that policy and get the thing done,
And it's
which is
small,
awesome.
Fritz.
Hmm.
But if you have the email in EZLynx, and you guys probably all know this, it sources the email into your e-sign. And I don't know if anybody's tried to type an email into the e-sign box, but it's so fickle. You have to type the email in full, don't hit space, and then there's a drop down and you have to click the suggestion for it to like apply. And I don't like to do that. So I get the email as much as I can.
So get that first and you're in better shape. So
Yeah.
good tip.
Just let it feed itself.
Good tip. Grabbing that email. Thanks. All right.
So for our last slide, it's still kind of how to save time, but these ones are pretty important. If you do everything that we discussed last week, approach EZLynx and approach EZLynx how we have discussed today. The two bullets below should be like much easier. The first one is like avoid carrier bias, which means don't chase good rates when they aren't good. And this includes trying to fix errors that are simply the carrier saying that they don't want them. We've all run into them now. Nationwide's a big culprit. It's just a hard market. It's the market we're selling in.
Well, and this was one that we want to just take a moment on too, because this is something that is newer for us to see in Firefly than previous hard markets, where there are carriers that are saying we need to either slow down from their perspective, slow down or stop writing business in a in a certain state or maybe a certain line of business, and that's done by throwing out an error message. And so, like I said, EZLynx is it's a way that you and carriers send messages to each other. Your interest in them by quoting them, their interest in your customer by the rate, but also, funny enough, sometimes those error messages. And so I guess what we'd say with that is, in some cases, it'll say, to get a rate, you have to go onto the rater and do it directly on the carrier site. Um, which if it does, you could, but what you want to ask yourself is, well, if the carrier is telling me they don't really want this, it's likely to get a rate increase on the renewal. Maybe there's some factor about that, whether it's low liability limits or something else that might make me look like not as good of an agent to that carrier. Just take those to heart. And actually, Max has a question here. He says, can you give a few examples of those full stop error messages versus a traditional error message? And do we have an article
Yeah.
about that in the portal, actually?
I don't know if it's been created yet because they're vague. One, and some of them vary. Like Nationwide has two. I think Nationwide has one that it is not a determination of eligibility, but they're not giving a rate via this rater. Hartford has one. It gives you an email to suggest to work with. I think I do know recently I've gotten some correspondence regarding anything 5100. They're saying no to, so it must be 100 300 plus. Grange is one. Theirs is kind of lengthy. It's a lengthy error, but it talks about and again, it doesn't tell you exactly what they're filtering for. And it may be, for all intents and purposes, a perfect risk. But all these carriers are just trying to stop the.
The bleeding. So there's a few, if
There's
you're
one.
looking to the
There's another
side,
one. Kyle got
yeah, people are sharing
it.
some of
Nationwide
those.
did not return a quote.
So would those be examples of ones that are, yeah, actually, everybody's doing really great with those. Um, are those ones, TJ, that when agents get them, they should say, oh, this is the kind of error message that's saying probably the carrier doesn't want this one?
Yeah, yeah, and again, so on the back end, some carriers say like, "Oh, you could go to the carrier and get a rate." Do they want too many people doing that? No. And it's just because they're not in a growth mindset right now. It doesn't mean they won't be 6 months from now or whatever. Just right now, they're trying to just tone things down. And the way they're doing that is they're limiting the comparative rate or quoting, unfortunately.
Yeah, and sometimes part of the challenge is some carriers are saying we just want to slow it down. Other carriers are saying, no, we really actually don't want this. We're getting
Hmm.
killed. I mean, what carrier was it yesterday? Somebody said in our morning meeting, had they congratulated us on a loss ratio so far year to date. This is property of 125%, which is terrible. But they're like, well, our overall, the whole company is running at 225. And these are just ginormous numbers for some carriers more than others. So what we're
It
saying
goes to
here
show
is
how
that,
relevant this conversation is. Look at all these errors people are
yeah, I
posting
know.
in the chat. They know
They're
they're seeing
amazing.
them.
They're right on top of it. So it's the kind of thing that you just need to be mindful of, and just be careful, because there might be some where you say, look, this is a really good customer. I know him. I don't, one where you feel like it's a package thing, and maybe if you can go to the carrier website, the limits are where the carrier wants it to be. You say, all right, let's do it. But if you do it too much, it's the kind of thing like, I don't know, if you're married, you've been in a relationship and you're talking about, hey, do you want, I want to go do this thing. And the person's like, I don't know. I guess you could. And then you say, let's do it. I mean, if you do that too many times, that person's going to say, I'm tired of this relationship and I
the
want to do something different. Yeah.
Also relevant to that bullet right there with the errors, which you guys are obviously running into, is don't and I've seen agents do this. They see it and they get scared that it's a non-standard risk. If you get rates from another carrier and you're still seeing those errors, I would say place it with those other carriers. I would say don't pivot to like Bristol West or something, because it's just that other carrier is going to be fine with that, and they're maybe not limiting business as much as the carrier who gave you the error.
Mhm. And there was a comment, a question that I answered in the chat, which was basically saying, hey, if you do get an error, does the carrier know that you quoted them? Yes, they do actually.
Mhm.
It still shows up as a quote that was run. So
It also
they are
shows if you bypass that and go to the carrier side. I do know some of the carriers are looking at that also. Some are going to be more strict than others, but that is
right,
another
depending on
thing
what
they
their
can see.
loss ratios are and stuff right now, they can say, hey, this agent like always, every time we send a message, always goes over and does it anyway. So if and as we hear feedback from carriers on that, we're taking it to agents specifically where that happens. But it's just something to be mindful of right now. And again, it's new for us in this hard market. We did not see those kinds of patterns in previous hard markets. So um, let's see. I think returning back to your slide, TJ, what else have we got?
Yeah. And the second bullet is the key to learn is to learn to identify the best rate. And get your best care to your best carrier ASAP. Because honestly, again, you can't sell your EZLynx rate. And this includes understanding how to pivot. Um, when you run into surprises on the carriers. So we had talked about something last week, how like when you're approaching EZLynx, sometimes we had talked about comparing the bundle instead of just like product for product. And on one instance, the bundle savings was way more than the other ones. However, the auto went up. It's important to know that you might not always be the first auto in the first home. It might be the fourth auto in the first home because the home is so good, but the auto went up a little bit, but the entire bundle is a good savings. So just learning how to identify that and not allowing that frustration to set in that it's not one and one or it's the second one and the fourth. I get some people that get so wrapped up in, well, I know Nationwide's typically good in this area and it's throwing up an error. But if you have a carrier B that is just as good and saving you just as much money, if you implement last week's information and this week's, you're going to have multiple carriers that are going to be good for that client, and you're going to have multiple solutions for that client.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I were to break it down into simple terms, it'd be just this one sentence. Approach every client with the complete solution in mind, which includes adding all applicable discounts, quote efficiently to get the best solution available, and then fine tune that solution in the carrier's site to propose to your client. All those pieces have to meld together. If you fall short on any of them, like if you're not willing to do telematics or if you skip the advanced quote discount, you need to accumulate all the things you can possibly do for that client every time. And that's what's going to give you multiple options. That's what's going to allow you to get through EZLynx smoother. That's what's going to make your transition to the carrier smoother. And then when you fine tune, you're going to have a easier time selling those quotes and you're going to do it faster.
Yeah, I think it's a great summary. And I think what TJ is trying to do here is to kind of connect what we talked about last week with what we're talking about today, which is that I think sometimes people have frustration with either EZLynx or a carrier and feeling like I can't get quite competitive enough when if you can put business with a carrier that wants it and use all the applicable discounts like TJ showed last week, even that there's that large number that really add up to some pretty significant discounts, whether it's bundling, telematics, advanced quote, paperless, all that kind of stuff. There are a lot of discounts that we see agents not using that you totally can and should. And if you use those, TJ's point is, what you realize is you don't have to have a frustration with EZLynx or with the carrier, but at least know that you can come in with your very best rate and pick people up. Let's say win more customers. So we really appreciate you, everybody. Hope this was useful. We again try to make the best use of the time, and we hope to see you next week.